Let's look at some what-ifs from the Cavs 2023-2024 season and spend a few minutes on each to see how things would have played out if something didn't happen. And our first what-if, Steve. Jason, what if Darius Garland never broke his jaw against the Celtics on December 15th?
I think he probably has a better year than where he wound up. I do think that the jaw played into. I don't think it was the only thing, but I do think it played a role in sort of the struggles that he had this year and the weight that he lost. And it's a traumatic injury. It's not your normal broken wrist or, it impacts everything. When your mouth is wired shut for however many weeks it was and the amount of weight that he lost, that's going to have a significant impact on you for a long time. So I can't call that the only reason why he struggled, but I do think that it was a significant factor in his year.
Yeah, the injury to Darius and then the subsequent injury to Evan Mobley is what kind of unlocked that 4-out, 1-in big lineup.
Yeah.
Now, Darius would have been part of that if it was just an Evan injury. But I think Darius shot the ball poorly, and that's not going to change. He was not shooting the ball well before injury. He shot it even worse after the injury. But when the NBA started allowing more physical contact, Jason, after the All-Star break, they stopped blowing the whistle as frequently. Darius Garland just seemed like a man in no man's land. He was scared to drive and take contact out of fear he would get hurt again. His shot wasn't falling, so he was scared to rely on the jump shot too much. I do think the jaw injury, while not the only excuse for the reason he was not the caliber of player the Cavs had hoped and anticipated for this season, I do think that was a major factor that kind of gets glossed over a little bit when we look at his season in totality. On the flip side, if he doesn't get injured, we don't ever unlock point guard Donovan. And for a month-long stretch, point guard Donovan was a top 5 player in basketball, and it was the best stretch of basketball he had ever played his entire career. I'm not 100% certain that's sustainable from Donovan over the course of the season because it puts so much pressure on one guy to not only create for himself but create for others. And the other guys around Donovan in that scenario aren't particularly shot creators in their own right either, which means it all falls on Donovan. But we got a glimpse. And I would say I am fascinated by that glimpse, Jason. And I want to see more of it in spurts next season. So on the one hand, if Darius doesn't break his jaw, he probably has a better season, but we don't get that little tiny teaser of point guard Donovan, which may end up being the best version of Donovan if they can find a running mate at the 2 guard who can also be an off-ball creator and take some of the pressure off him.
The question is, I'm not sure you're going to see that regardless. I don't know. I'm really curious to see how the summer plays out. I know, we've talked about this before, and, my name is on the story. We reported it that if Donovan re-signs, they could try and force Darius out. None of that has happened yet. Donovan hasn't signed a contract. Cavs are telling teams, we're not trading him. We're not breaking this up. And we'll see when push comes to shove if they stay true to that. They don't have to trade him. They don't just because they're trying to push him out or force him out, they don't have to trade him. So it's going to be an interesting summer.
Our second what if. We were told all offseason that Evan Mobley was in the lab working on his jump shot, Jason. So what if Evan Mobley came into the 2023-2024 season with a reliable three-point jump shot? What if?
There would not be any talk about having to break up Jarrett and Evan. I think that they would fit together a lot better than that, and there wouldn't be a discussion. I mean, Jarrett was your second-best player last year, and yet and I'm in that camp that believes that you probably should split them up, in large part because the Evans shot hasn't come around the way that we thought that it would. Defensively, he's exactly what you thought he would be. Offensively, it just hasn't gotten there yet. And had he progressed as a shooter, it would open up so much more of the offense. Hell, maybe JB Bickerstaff's still the coach of this team, quite frankly. I think part of the reason, I think Donovan was a big reason why JB's no longer here. And I also think the lack of development in Evans' offensive game played a role in that as well. So he could be, and maybe Jarrett is still here next year. It very well could be. But all the talk around having to split these guys up would dissipate, and JB could still be the coach of this team.
I agree with everything you said, but indulge me for a second. Let me go on a magical fantasy ride here of the what if Evan Mobley had a jump shot. If Evan Mobley came into last season as a 36% three-point shooter, Jason, I'm not asking for 40, but I'm not asking for Dirk. I'm not asking for Karl Anthony Towns. I'm saying just a reliable three-point shooter. Evan Mobley's an all-star. Evan Mobley is right on the fringe for an All-NBA caliber player because the list of forwards who made the All-NBA team this season, there were a few spots up for grabs. The combination of Evan Mobley's defense, which we know currently is terrific, with a full bag of offensive weapons, including a three-point shot, which, by the way, if he's making three-point shots, it spreads the defense. That means Darius, Donovan, Jarrett all have more room to operate. It also means defenses can't overload half the court when they're running pick and rolls on one side of the court with Evan and Darius and/or Donovan and Jarrett. And it makes everything look so much better.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly than that, Jason, we were promised a unicorn. And I'm not saying that Evan Mobley with a three-point shot would be in the Wemby category. I'm not saying Evan with a reliable three-point shot would even be top 15 player in the league right now. But instead of being Little Sebastian, which is who Evan Mobley currently is, a very good show pony, but not a unicorn, he'd be a baby rhinoceros. And you'd see the beginning of a hump on the top of his head starting to blossom into what the Cavs told us we were getting when they drafted Evan Mobley 3rd overall. I'm not saying there'd be world peace. I'm not saying it would end world hunger. I'm not saying there'd be no water droughts. I'm not saying bad people would all be admonished. But I am saying if Evan Mobley came into last season with a reliable three-point jump shot, we wouldn't be having 75% of the conversations we are having today about the future of the Cavs roster. Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot makes the core four work. Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot makes the Cavs a legitimate threat to beat the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks in the Eastern Conference. Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot means JB Bickerstaff probably isn't fired, to your point. And most importantly, Evan Mobley with a three-point jump shot is a guaranteed lock for the rookie max, which he's going to get anyway. But instead of us having the conversation of, we know he's going to get it, but is he really worth it?
Yeah.
It's the question of, we're only getting him for that? What a steal. That is the what if Evan Mobley had a reliable three-point jump shot entering the 2023-2024 season.
I love it.
All right, number 3, Steve. What if, and I believe it's the Donovan Mitchell one, what if Donovan Mitchell, Jason, never hurt his knee in February? And I spelled February wrong, I think. No, I didn't.
No, you got that one right.
It looks wrong every time I see it. But what if he never hurt his knee on that free throw attempt against Chicago? Which then derailed the rest of the season. You want me to start on this one?
Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead. I want to hear what you say. Go ahead.
The month of March was terrible for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah.
That's where they were riding high, coming off that 19-1 streak. Was it 19-2, 18-2, whatever it was, coming off that hot streak. They roll into the All-Star break. Donovan tweaks his knee. He misses a few games in March. Then Darius, all his shortcomings this season get put under the magnifying glass because he can't hide next to Donovan Mitchell, who just erases so many other mistakes and so many other shortcomings offensively. Evan Mobley, also his offense development, while it did see progress throughout the season, it becomes less of a storyline because they're winning games. Part of the reason these stories become such a big issue is they're losing. And when you win, those stories are non-existent and non-talking points because guess what? There's not a lot to criticize in the moment. You can go big picture in the offseason and talk about it, but in the moment when your team's going 18-2, we don't talk about the fact they played a crappy team almost every night during that 20-game stretch. They played Washington 3 times. They played San Antonio twice. Like, they didn't beat a gauntlet of great teams. But if Donovan doesn't get hurt, that means he's not hurt entering the postseason. So he probably doesn't get hurt against Boston, which gives them a better chance. If he's not injured, they probably don't take Orlando to 7 games. That series is probably wrapped up a little earlier. I still think he was not at 100%, and his inability to continue that scoring outburst on a night-in, night-out basis changes. And although at the end of the day, they got enough from Donovan to beat teams in the playoffs, or at least beat Orlando and compete with Boston, I think a lot of the big questions that came to fruition about JB Bickerstaff and the complete makeup and correlation of this team don't ever come to the surface because they're 55 and whatever that would be, Jason. And it's hard to ask a lot of questions in the moment for a team that's on a 57-win pace.
I don't know that anything changes if he doesn't get hurt. And I know that's
interesting.
I know that's wild to say because you think your best player hurts his knee, it derails everything. They still lose to Boston if they're fully healthy. They'll probably beat. You're right. Like they'd probably beat Orlando a little bit easier. But I don't think they're good enough to beat Boston. They still lose to Boston.
If they beat Orlando in 5 and then lose to Boston the way they did, is JB still a coach?
Yeah, no.
It's okay. Still think
he's still going to get fired. I guess the sliding door theory, if you really want to go down it, is do they try and manipulate to get to Orlando if they have a fully healthy Donovan? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think it still plays out the same way.
But what if they they're only in that spot because of how poorly they played in March, and the record in March was, I forget the exact number, was not good.
Yeah, they were not good.
If Donovan's healthy, they're probably not even in a situation to try and manipulate that because they probably are the 2 seed in the East. They finished, a game out of the 2 seed, despite a piss-poor March?
I'll actually go the other way, that where the injury could be a good thing. Now, if you're going to take everything Donovan says as true, then this could be a good thing because we had the conversation going back to last season before the loss to the Knicks where I asked him, would you ever punt a game just to send a message? And he said no, that he's got to win every game he plays, and that's where you get into the give me the ball and get out of the way type of mentality that drove me crazy to watch. And then I talked to him toward the end of this season that just ended, and he said, he was dragging his leg up and down the floor in March and saying, I'm not helping anybody here. He kind of came around to what I was saying and said that he agreed and he had lessons to learn too. And yeah, he wants to put Darius in spots where Darius has to win the game for them. And it all sort of stemmed from the knee. So from that aspect, I would say maybe it was a good thing because it forced him to trust guys a little bit more because he couldn't do it. And ultimately, I don't think the season ends any differently. I still think it ends in a loss to Boston, whether it's the conference finals or the second round. Now, if it's the conference finals, maybe JB saves his job in that realm. But for the most part, I know it sounds crazy to say. I don't know that really a whole lot changes.
I just looked at it. If they get the 2 seed, they play Philly in the first round, which actually could have been a worse scenario for the Cavs. So maybe it's actually on the flip side. But if they could have avoided Boston until the third round because they had a better record, who the hell knows? That's why it's a big what if.
Yeah, then maybe it does save JB. Although I still think it comes down to
him versus Donovan.
Him versus Donovan in the end, and which one you're going to pick, and the coach always loses that, and the player always wins.
We have one more what if, then we're going to wrap this up for a special edition of the Ultimate Cavs Show. Jason, what if the Cavs did fire JB after the Knicks series loss instead of letting him coach the team again this season?
I was thinking about this one. Obviously, you have a different coach. It's probably not James Borrego or Kenny Atkinson. I guess it could be. It could have been some of the same names, but it's probably one of the guys from the last hiring cycle. Although I don't think it's Ime Udoka because Houston jumped on that so early.
Budenholzer's the biggest name they could have, or Nick Nurse.
I'm not a huge Budenholzer fan. I know he's had some success. I know he won a championship with Milwaukee. I've never been a big fan of his. Maybe it's Nick Nurse. Maybe Nick Nurse is the coach of this team today. I like him better than Budenholzer. Not sold on any. I think a lot of these guys are interchangeable, frankly. It is an interesting what if. I know a lot of people wanted JB fired after last year. I thought he deserved another chance to run it back with a more complete roster. I guess I would say Nick Nurse is probably your head coach today, although I don't.
You don't know if it makes him any better.
Yeah, I don't know if it makes him better, and I don't know if Nick would want this job. I think he walked into a job that he felt was pretty good at the time.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Jason route on this and say I have no freaking clue because it depends on the head coach they hired. Yeah. And if you want to go the Nick Nurse route, I do think Nick Nurse is a better coach than JB Bickerstaff. He's won a championship when JB is 1-10 on the road in the playoffs. So, you're picking different options, but I still think the collective unit, if we're doing just this is the singular what if you have 2 non-shooting bigs, you can't win in today's NBA. So I don't think whoever the coach is makes that much of a difference, and that's why I'm so adamant about even if you bring in a Borrego or a Kenny Atkinson, and I did the whole breakdown on Borrego, I still think you have to adjust the roster to reach the goals and the heights you want to reach because I just think philosophically speaking, the construction of this Cavs roster does not meet the modern version of what basketball is today, which is spacing and play creation and shot creation, and the Cavs just frankly don't have enough of that right now.
But would a Nick Nurse, and we're just using him as an example, would he have gotten more out of Evan this year offensively?
I would hope so. I think it's impossible to get less than you got from from Evan just because he was an afterthought in everything. And I know it's a small sample size. I know the Boston series was no Porzingis. I get all that. Putting him at the high post and letting him facilitate is his best offensive skill right now. Yeah. And it was not at all whatsoever 0.0% in the JB Bickerstaff offensive scheme until it had to be because other people went down. And I think that's the one thing if you want to finger point at what went wrong this year and, hey, what could you have done differently to save your job, JB? It's try and use that as a different look offensively than just the pick and roll variations they had.
Yeah.
And we didn't see it till it was too late. So, yeah, they probably would have got more out of Evan Mobley. But I can't assume he was a jump shooter coming into this season because he wasn't a jump shooter at all.
Right.
And they tried to make that a priority, and he didn't.